Hey, what's up, you amazing hackers? So we talked about insecure direct object references recently, but what about broken access control? So broken access control is exactly as it states. It can manifest itself in both horizontal and vertical privilege escalation. And when we speak about privilege escalation, what we are actually talking about is the ability to execute functionality that we are not supposed to be able to execute. What we are exactly talking about, what we mean by vertical and horizontal, is something entirely different. So you can execute functionality, but there are different ways that you can execute that functionality. Either you can execute that functionality normally for your own data, but not for all data. So that would be horizontal privilege escalation, and we'll get into some more detailed examples later on. This might seem a bit abstract for now. Let's say you have some functionality that you're not supposed to be able to execute at all. That would be your vertical privilege escalation. So to quickly summarize, let's say we have two users. We have an administrative role and a normal user. We can test administrative settings as the low privileged user, and that would be vertical privilege escalation. If you can update things or if there's personal data involved, that would of course be pretty serious. And we can also test if we have a normal user and another normal user, if we can access the data from one user to another. So that would also be IDOR, of course. You guys know this if you've already seen the IDOR video. But as you know, IDOR is just another form of broken access control. So another example I can give you guys is, let's say you have a normal user and a trial account. Maybe the trial account cannot execute all of the functionality. You can test for that. That's also a vertical privilege escalation scenario. Now, a couple of things that you can gather from that. There are some properties that we can define. So to speak of broken access control, the following conditions have to be met, of course. We need to be able to create different users or need to be assigned different users. If we just have one user, that's going to be quite a problem. The user needs to be of a different privilege level if we want to test for vertical privilege escalation. For example, we need to have a normal user and an administrative user. And there needs to be functions that our low privileged user is not authorized to execute, either with the given data or at all. So that's basically what broken access control is, but how do we test for it? Again, we can test this manually or we can test it semi-automatic. I don't believe robots have the ability to execute complex stateful scenarios where often sequential steps are required that rely on previously inputted data. So for us, it would be easier to go through this manually, but we can have some tools in our tool belt to go through it automatically. Well, not fully automatically, of course, but more about that later. So as for manually, to test for broken access control manually, we have several options at our disposal as well. One of the most powerful tools I keep warning you guys about is JavaScript, and we can actually do some things in the developer console of your browser as well. So JavaScript files, they will contain some functions that can be executed. One common tactic developers use to protect their programs is to simply disable UI elements. This means that the JavaScript functions might still be executable. If that's the case, say for example, if you cannot click on the UI elements to open the invoices, but if you're able to execute a JavaScript function which prints all of the invoice details, you have broken access control on your hands. You may have noticed this requires some knowledge of how your target works, because you need to know which levels of authorization exist and what those types of accounts can and cannot do. You will also need to be able to recognize what different JavaScript functions might do, so that's some very in-depth knowledge of your program you have there, and it's going to require that you actually test your target quite thoroughly. We talked a bit about the developer console of the browser as well, because there is a tab called console in it. So if you right click on any web page and you click on the inspect element, you'll see something pop up, and there you'll see a tab called console. If you click on the console, it will let you execute any JavaScript, and it has IntelliSense as well. Now what IntelliSense does, guys, is it means that you can type any letter, let's say for example an A, and the console will automatically search through all of the JavaScript files available, and it will look for any JavaScript function that contains that letter and display it to you. On top of the previously discussed advantages, we can also execute JavaScript directly from this console, and we can immediately observe the result. We can also go to, there is a sources tab, and here we can see what kind of JavaScript sources have been actually executed and have been included. And there are a bunch of different useful tabs in here as well. I would highly recommend you guys watch Tom Nam Nam's video that he did together with Stuck on this topic, because it's very informational. Now, we can also take a more direct approach, and we can simply log in as a high-privileged user, navigate to the functionality a low-privileged user cannot execute, and we can copy that URL. Then we can log out and log in back again as the low-privileged user and paste the URL in the browser. Since we should not be able to execute this functionality. If we can, we again have a broken access control. So a few caveats on this, however, are that again we need to be very familiar with the level of authorization that the program supports, so what type of users it supports, and what those types of users can and cannot do. Again, very detailed knowledge of your target is required for this. A last strategy that we can take is bordering on automation, and it would be the first step that we need to prepare for in the next chapter as well. We can also try and send all of the requests that the low-privileged user cannot execute to our repeater in the man-in-the-middle proxy such as burp, and we can replace the authorization method. Say for example they have an authorization header with a JWT token or a session cookie. We can actually replace those with the low-privileged user session cookies. And now guys, the point is not to grab those session cookies or that JWT token. That is not the point at all. We just want to test the high privileged users' actions, so we copy them and we send them to the repeater in our proxy, and we replace the authorization headers with low privileged authorization headers. If we can access that functionality when we shouldn't be able to, we again have broken access control issues. Now, I talked a little bit about those authorization headers. This also means that we can use authorize. I have a whole separate video on that, so I would highly recommend that you watch it. And then again, there's the burp match and replace strategy. We already went over this in the either chapter, but I'm going to quickly go over it again. So since authorize basically just matches the authorization headers and attempts to replace them with the ones that the user has supplied in every request that's being sent, and then it basically just resends that request. We can also do something very similar in match and replace. If you open your proxy tab in burp, you have an options tab there, and in there you can see the match and replace header. If you click add, you can actually add a replace rule. So what this rule is going to do, and what I usually set as the type, is request header, because we want to replace the authorization headers, which will most often be a session cookie or an authorization header. And we can match any cookie that matches the cookie that we're logged in as the high privileged user. So we just match the cookie or the JWT token, of course, and we replace it with the one that we have from the low privileged user. Now, to get the JWT token or the session cookie from the low privileged user, you can simply log in as that user, and you can check your HTTP history in the proxy tab, and one of the latest calls is going to contain the authorization header that you need. There's going to be a link in the description to an article that's going to help you guys a little bit if you want some screenshots as well. And now, as long as we activate that rule, we can click around in the application and click on functionality that our low privileged user is not supposed to be able to execute. When we do that, if we see that we actually get some functionality that we can execute, which we're not supposed to be able to, we have another broken access control on our hands. Now, this is also going to mean that you're going to get a lot of errors popping up left and right, because that user is not supposed to be able to do a lot of the functionality that the administrator is supposed to be able to do. That's okay. If you want to disable those errors, you can simply click the checkbox and disable the rule again, and that should help you test manually again. So a couple of questions I have for you guys is, can you think of any other ways that we can automatically test for broken access control? And can you find any other tools to automate that process? So I hope you found this useful, because this is one of my major things. Broken access control is a really good vulnerability in my opinion, and I enjoy looking for it very much. I hope it was educational, because this is not very simple. I completely understand that. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below, or just join our Discord server. I'm on there most of the time, and a lot of other very competent people will help you as well. Thank you very, very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later. Peace.